Hey, everybody, it's Pastor Hugo. Our chosen journal takes us this week to Exodus chapter 3, and there we encounter Moses. In the opening of the chapter, this is starting out just a normal day for Moses, a day like any other. He's out watching the sheep, he's taking care of his father in law's sheep, as he's done hundreds of times before. And he finds himself on our version says, the west side of the wilderness. There's a great version, another version that uses a great phrase, the edge of the wilderness. Moses finds himself on the edge of the wilderness. And the edge of the wilderness is a pretty cool place. We find out a lot of stuff happens on the edge of the wilderness when we're standing in that place where we have what's familiar, but in front of us is the unfamiliar, the wilderness. And one of the things that happens for Moses at the edge of the wilderness is God shows up, and he shows up in an unexpected way. For Moses, it's the burning bush, a bush that catches fire and isn't consumed. And God speaks from there and tells him that he is standing on holy ground. God is present, so it is holy ground. For our edges of the wilderness, God reveals himself also in unexpected ways. And we have those wilderness moments. Where we're facing the death of a loved one, we're facing a job transition, we're facing empty nesting, we have an aging parent or an aging spouse. All of those things are edge of the wilderness times where we're familiar with what's behind us and what's around us, but we're not familiar with what's in front of us. And that was the case for Moses. And so for Moses, God revealed himself in an extraordinary way and made himself present. The second thing that happens in this edge of the wilderness place is that God restores the relationships. One of the first things he says to Moses is, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And the implication there is, I am your God too. I've restored the relationship. And that covenant that I made with Abraham and with Isaac and with Jacob, that covenant applies to you, because just as I was their God, I am your God. God restores that relationship in those edge of the wilderness places. And then the third thing that happens at the edge of the wilderness is that's the place where God calls. God calls us to a greater work, a harder work, something that requires more faith in him. For Moses, it was go back to that place you just fled from. Moses had fled Egypt because he killed an Egyptian, and so he fled to Midian. Now, God, excuse me, God is saying, go back to Egypt. Not only that, go to Pharaoh, go to the king of Egypt, and tell him he's about to lose his huge free labor source, that all the slaves of the Israelites are going to be set free. God calls us on these edge of the wilderness things to greater things. But then God does something else. God does more than we could possibly imagine. He did for Moses, he done earlier for Abraham, for Isaac, for Jacob. He did it for David. He does it for us when we find ourselves in those edge of the wilderness places where we're familiar with what's behind us and around us, but we don't know what's in front of us. God shows up in unexpected ways. God restores the relationship. And then God calls us to do something great. And that's where living by faith happens, is in the edge of the wilderness. It's when we face the unknown that we are truly living by faith. But always, 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 we face the unknown, going that our covenant God is with us to bless us in ways that we can't begin to imagine. Well, that's it for this week. Have a great week. We'll see you with next week's devotion.